Anti-Wall Street demonstrations swelled on Wednesday, as nurses, transit workers and other union members joined a rally at the heart of New York's financial district. College students walked out of classes in solidarity with the Occupy Wall Street movement, which has grown in less than 3 weeks from a ragged group in downtown Manhattan to protesters of all ages demonstrating from Seattle to Tampa. Thousands of anti-greed protesters invaded Washington Square Park today, vowing to fan the flames of dissent and putting them toe-to-toe with cops ready to enforce a curfew. Here's a photo from Washington Square Park where there are tons of cops, media like CNN, a chopper, and most probably upwards of 3,000 protesters at this site. Callers are overwhelming phone lines at the Portland Marathon between runners calling to find out the status of the race and Occupy Portland supporters urging marathon organizers to share the park space. Occupy Portland organizers say protesters will not leave the downtown park, despite Portland city officials' demands that they clear out this morning in advance of Sunday's Portland Marathon. More than 600 protesters camped out overnight in Lonesdale and Chapman Squares across from the federal courthouse at Southwest 3rd Avenue and Main Street. Protesters plan to settle into Chapman Square indefinitely, said organizer Ivy Knight. Demonstrators protesting Wall Street corporate power congregated Friday at the Hennepin County Government Center Plaza in downtown Minneapolis, lingering into the night and vowing to occupy the space indefinitely. By mid-afternoon, more than 500 people had participated, some coming and going, and the crowd grew after evening rush hour. The tone was festive, despite serious themes, deploring corporate greed and the coziness of government and big business. An interesting article from Activist Post about Occupy Tampa. It states that there were zero problems, and that park was left in a cleaner state than it had been before the event. With bullhorns prohibited, the voices of many were used instead. Though a curfew is in effect for the park, it was not enforced. Overall, it was a productive and harmonious protest, and I hope it will be but one of as many as are necessary until we get actual change. It's a movement that started in the Big Apple, and is popping up across the country. And it showed up in north-central Florida. Occupy Gainesville organizers, supporting the Occupy Wall Street demonstrations, laid out their strategy for making a mark here, and this is just the planning stages of Occupy Gainesville, set to begin on October 12th, and mimic New York's 3-week-old protest group. People rallied outside Philadelphia City Hall as well on Thursday as part of an Occupy Philadelphia rally modeled after the ongoing protest on Wall Street in New York. The crowd began gathering on Thursday morning and swelled through the noon hour. These Occupy Houston events spent the night in Herman Square Park near City Hall and plan to march again today. Maria Haig, spokeswoman for Occupy Houston, says they've been in contact with other Occupy groups who camped out in other cities and will continue their cause today in solidarity with Occupy Wall Street. The groups are focused on what they call corporate greed and the disproportionate influence of the very wealthy. In Los Angeles, lawmakers, dressed in dark suits and surrounded by aides, caused a stir when they approached the ragtag collection of tents, tarps and sleeping bags just off of Temple Street. News media and protesters armed with video cameras swarmed as the officials shook hands and introduced themselves. 8 hours into Occupy Cincinnati and there is still a crowd. Also, there are even more countless movements popping up across the country. There are people gathering from Binghamton to Albany, and Syracuse in New York, many in PA and all of the Northeast. It has begun. Seattle police arrested 25 Occupy Seattle protesters at Westlake Park on Wednesday, hours after Mayor Mike McGinn ordered the demonstrators to pack up their tents and leave. Seattle Parks Department workers took down the tents after the arrests were made. Seattle police reported that they arrested 21 men, 2 women and 2 juveniles, both girls. Of those 25, 9 were sent to the King County Jail on suspicion of obstructing a public officer. The other 16 were released, but police vowed to forward their cases to the city attorney for consideration of the same charge. Mayor issues Occupy permits, Westlake all day, City Hall at night. According to the mayor's latest blog post, Occupy Seattle protesters may rally at Westlake Park during the daytime and begin setting up tents in the City Hall Plaza in the evening. About 250 protesters marched from Capitol Hill to downtown Seattle Friday afternoon to mark the 10th anniversary of the war in Afghanistan. Led by 2 drummers and marchers holding a long yellow banner that said, "End the war now," protesters left Seattle Central Community College and walked down Pine Street a dozen or so blocks to Westlake Park. Mayor Cantor decried the protests that started several weeks ago in New York, and have spread to major cities across the country. Cantor said in a speech at the Values Voters Summit in Washington that he is increasingly concerned about the growing mobs represented at the protests. "Well, we here at Get In It for Truth, and many, many, many others, are concerned about your mob, Mr. Cantor. The NYPD is essentially doing the dirty work for the banks, which makes complete sense when you consider the fact that JP Morgan actually funds the New York City Police Department. That's right, the very police department that has been filmed numerous times beating and pepper spraying the Occupy Wall Street protesters has received a considerable amount of money from the very banks that the protesters are targeting. While covering the Occupy Wall Street protests on Wednesday night, Fox 5 photographer Roy Eisen was hit in the eyes by pepper spray from a police officer, and Fox 5 reporter Dick Brennan was hit by an officer's baton. The protests on Wall Street continued to grow all day. The rallies and their participants are showing no signs of slowing down. It's simple. We the people want the right to print our own money. It was taken from U.S. by an act of Congress, and it can be given back by the same. It only takes the signature of our president. This is the reason we are occupying Wall Street. We don't want any more economy with the Fed at the head of the table. That's over. It's time to print interest-free money, backed by we the people. It's not a fairy tale, it's a nightmare. That is, it's a nightmare for the Federal Reserve Bank, and it's called the American Dream.
The financial system has been turned over to the Federal Reserve Board. That board administers the finance system by authority of a purely profiteering group. The system is private, conducted for the sole purpose of obtaining the greatest possible profits from the use of other people's money. We have in this country one of the most corrupt institutions the world has ever known. I refer to the Federal Reserve Board. Most Americans have no real understanding of the operation of the international moneylenders. The accounts of the Federal Reserve System have never been audited. It operates outside the control of Congress and manipulates the credit of the United States.
The Occupy Wall Street protester you'll never see on Fox News. What they're not looking for is someone clean, intelligent and articulate that can stay on point despite painfully leading questions, be thorough, be courteous, and stay true. Staying true also means to look at the false so that you may gauge things, and have various points of view.
Jesse, so Ray, your partner here, colleague, comrade, she got, seen the...
Comrade? Interesting exclamation. There does seem to be an awful lot of communists and socialists making mainstream news whilst amidst Occupy protests.
Well, I don't know. It's really difficult to kind of answer questions leading to those conclusions. I'd say that we didn't take our cue off of anybody, really. It became a more spontaneous movement. As far as seeing this end, I wouldn't like to see it end. I think I'd like to see the conversation continue. This is what we should have been talking about after 2008 when the economy collapsed. We basically patched a hole on the tire and said, yeah, let the car keep rolling. Unfortunately, it's fun to talk to the propaganda machine in the media, especially conservative-leaning networks such as yourself, because we find that we can't get conversations on the Department of Justice's ongoing investigation of News Corporation, for which you are an employee.
This man is quite intelligent and inspiring, certainly, and he's barely spoken many words. Is there script memorization that has happened here? If so, why such a setup in such a good light? Well, that is, barring the fact that a woman called this man comrade, which has very certain definitions, but also can be interpreted lightly.
Certainly ask questions like, why are the poor engaging in class warfare? Now, after 30 years of having our living standards decrease while the wealthiest 1% have had it better than ever, I think it's time for maybe, some participation in our democracy that isn't funded by news cameras and gentlemen such as yourself.
Excellent point. So excellent, in fact, that the reporter could barely hold back a smirk, the man being interviewed as well. He could barely stop from laughing. With Occupy Wall Street protests now emerging internationally, there are concerns which need to be addressed and kept in mind as the movement moves forward. The process through which a potentially powerful movement may be co-opted and controlled is slight and subtle. If Occupy Wall Street hopes to strive for the 99, it must not submit to the 1, in any capacity. For the Occupy movement to build up and become a true force for change, it must avoid and reject the organizational and financial contributions of institutions, be they political parties, non-profits, or philanthropic foundations. The efforts are subtle, but effective. They seek to organize, professionalize, and institutionalize a movement, push forward the issues they desire, which render the movement useless for true liberation, as these are among the very institutions the movement should be geared against. In a historic development launched October 6, 2011, Alex Jones called for an Occupy the Fed campaign that is destined to go nationwide. Millions of people are now poised to join history in the making, InfoWars says. Here's Jesse Ventura, a great patriot, but now at Occupy Wall Street and speaking about it as if campaigning. Much like Alex Jones launching his Occupy the Fed, this movement is a race, it seems, in who will be the next face of the revolution. Be careful, folks. Do not go from eating cake to eating cake.
I want to be the first political face in the country that will come forth and support this movement. I think that I have to be the face of this movement. It can't be a Democrat or Republican, because I not only talk the talk, I walk the walk. I never took $1 of corporate money. I never took one PAC dollar to become elected governor of Minnesota. I only raised $300,000 to do that, to become governor here. So my campaign was never a campaign about money. My campaign was a campaign about ideas. And we won with it then, and it can happen again.
We would be fools not to think that most of this is engineered. But we believe that now is the time to stand and show that we can do the right things despite being pushed incessantly toward the wrong. Armed with this knowledge, and the truth, the honest hearts of individuals must shine and overcome. We must take our voices and votes to the streets. We know what to do. We've seen the globalists engineering for months, years, decades. They want us awake, but we do think they underestimate our awakening. My name is James, and my friends and I, we do hope you get in it for truth.